first YouTube live stream. We today are very glad to be hosting Akua, who will be speaking to you a little bit about her experience with psychedelics, how that's impacted her and her family, and some of the spiritual practices she uses, and much, much more. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Akua, and can everybody give her a warm welcome?
Hello, Grace. Thank you so much for inviting me on here. I'm really flattered and pleased to be asked. So yeah, it's really good. So do you want me to just launch straight into my story?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I'm a Londoner, Ghanaian Londoner, and I moved away from the UK 11 years ago when my son was 8. I'm a mum with one son, and I didn't actually want him to grow up here. I'd always had the ambition to go back home to Ghana. And when he was 8, we were able to do that, which was absolutely brilliant. And we were there for 5 years. And then my mum in the UK became unwell. And we came back just to look after her for a short while after her operation. But unfortunately, the operation didn't go well. And we ended up having to stay. And I enrolled my son into a local secondary school, which was absolutely great at first. We were really pleased, and being a kid straight from Africa, he was doing brilliantly, won the school speech prize in his first 2 weeks, a real kind of model student. He was 13 at the time, but unfortunately this made him really stand out, and he started to be bullied, and then he was basically groomed into I don't want to use the word gang, because gang makes it sound like something else that it's actually not. Just an affiliation of young people who were dealing drugs in the school, but this ended up spilling out, and he started getting into trouble. He was arrested with a knife one summer. That's when I got to hear about it, and I was so shocked. I was so shocked that I think I actually laughed when the policeman came into our house and said that my son had been arrested with a knife, and he was with another young man who had some weed on him. The whole thing was so, to me, utterly ridiculous. But it wasn't. And really for us, it was the start of a 3-4 year long nightmare, where I saw my son totally change. He wasn't the person that he used to be. He wasn't interested in what he was interested in before. And he started to fail in all of his subjects across the board. He started really showing signs of stress and PTSD, but it was all very difficult to deal with, because you can see something is happening, but it's hard to stop because you're trying to speak to somebody who can no longer hear you. And for me, after a while, it started to really affect me. I became quite depressed, and my mother's health was not good. So I was dealing with both having a sick mother and also dealing with what was going on with my son. I became incredibly depressed. And I was running a cooperative shop with lots of people. There was about 20 different people's things in the shop that I had to look after. So it was really difficult. I went to the doctors, and for a short period of time, I thought about going on antidepressants, but there was just a part of me that really realized that this was not the road that I wanted to go down. But I also realized that I really needed to be able to cope with everything. So the first thing that I actually got was St. John's wort. And when I started taking St. John's wort, I did start to feel better. And that's when I started to look at, okay, what else can I do to really start to change things for me? So I'd heard about ayahuasca, and I think I should say I had a sense that what was going on was something that me as a mum needed to take control of, because after my son's arrest and going to court, finally I managed to get social services involved, but it was really difficult to try and get them involved. And there was a big problem there with social services, because when they finally did become involved, it was really difficult. I was getting a lot of things like, you know, he needs more freedom. You're being a really overbearing African parent. You need to understand that children in the UK can have more freedom than you're allowing him. And these things were really difficult, because it was like, well, I'm also brought up in the UK, and I know what's going on is something more than just not getting enough freedom. So as it was going on, and I realized that these groups and people were not really able to see the truth of what was going on, which I also couldn't even tell them, because at this stage, he wasn't disappearing in terms of county lines. County lines is when a child will leave where they live, their county, and go into another county where most of the time they're working with another group of young people or older people, and they are very often set up in a house that belongs to either a vulnerable person or a drug addict, and then they are selling to addicts, and then when all the drugs are finished, they come back home. So these children are usually going missing 4 days to 2 weeks. This wasn't happening yet, but I could see that this could start happening. And I didn't feel like the authorities and other people could really help me, because I was saying things like, why can't we put a tracker on him? And, you know, I was told that this was not something that they could do. So I really started to think about, okay, how can I empower myself, get the kind of knowledge that I need to be able to really help myself and my son? And one of the first things that helped me was finding out about Cambo, because I'd found out about ayahuasca, but you know, there was no money or time to be going off to Peru to get ayahuasca. So I had Cambo. Cambo was brilliant. Cambo really, which is a toad medicine, frog medicine, and it opens your heart, is totally legal, and that really helped me start on the road that made me realize that I needed a stronger medicine. I had to do a lot more work on myself, and it really helped me to understand the kind of education that I needed to now parent a child who was really on a different road. The first book that was absolutely brilliant was Gabor Mate's book, Hold On To Your Kids. I've been really into Gabor Mate because I recognized a lot of the stuff that he was talking about in terms of trauma, PTSD, pregnancy, and what happens to children born in certain stressful situations, epigenetics, and I could really recognize a lot of the stuff that he was talking about in terms of Jewish mums in the Second World War, and then the resulting children, and all of this stuff. And I could see the correlations between the Black community, my family, and what he was talking about in terms of his family. So when he talked about peer attachment in the book, Hold On To Your Kids, it was brilliant, because I could see that's what's happened. My son has unattached from me, the family, and is now attached to his peers. So there's some exercise in there, what to do, followed those, brilliant, helped a bit, but still my son is not my own anymore. And then after the Cambo, I was able to locate somebody to have Iboga, and Iboga was brilliant. Iboga is an African psychedelic. Mostly it grows around Gabon, that area, and Cameroon, and it's very long lasting. You know, you're down for like 2-3 days when you take iboga, and it slows down the heart, so that some people have died taking iboga, but the person I did it with was a really wise person, and she has a protocol where you microdose for 2 to 3 months beforehand, and you must also have Cambo. So it was really, really, really amazing. For me, I always say it's like it put a rod up my back. I was able to think up new ways of being able to deal with my son, because as I'm going through my journey to kind of become the mother I needed to be, and I was very aware quite quickly after starting Cambo that I had to become a better version of myself to be able to really deal with this. And I could only rely on the authorities up to a certain level, because they literally really are just doing their job. And also, no one was talking about how children who've been groomed at schools are actually now people who've been brainwashed. And that was really difficult, because I could see my son had been brainwashed, but I couldn't find anybody talking about brainwashing and gangs, or how it was really difficult at that stage. And I found a brilliant book by a wonderful woman, and the title's got out of my head, so I will tell Grace so she can share it in the post stuff. That this book was about a woman who left the Moonies, a religious cult, and she was the only person I found who was talking about how cults and gangs kind of operate in the same way, in terms of how they capture the psyche and the mind of the person, and how they keep them in. So the more you're saying how awful the gang or the cult is, actually the more you're keeping them in the cult. And I read her book, and that book was brilliant, because she, and in the book is her story of being caught up in this cult, leaving her friends and her family, how she left, and then how she then started working as somebody who took other people out of cults. And that section of the book was brilliant, because one of the first things she said was, stop putting down the cult or the group or the gang. You've got to stop that. You've got to actually start treating your family member as if their choices in life are completely normal, are completely good, are completely worthwhile. And that was really hard. But by this stage, I realized that I had to try something different, because and I think I found that book about 2.5 years in. So by this time, my son was going missing. He'd be away for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, even 5 days sometimes. He was more and more and more kind of fractured. You know, he wasn't himself. You could tell he couldn't think straight. He couldn't remember things. He was really highly strung. And you could, it's like his intelligence had really come down. And we had a lot of family members coming round to speak to him and all of this stuff, and none of it was working. And then he, while he was away one time, he got hit over the head with a baseball bat and was robbed. Whatever he had on him was taken. And we only found out when the hospital phoned me to say that he'd come in and they'd had to sew up the back of his head. So when that happened, the whole family came round, and it was decided that he should go and live with my sister and and her family. And it was brilliant for a little while, him being in this extended family situation away from us in northwest London. A wonderful, wonderful, and I have to mention the wonderful people who helped us. The first wonderful person who helped us was an amazing multi-millionaire who, as soon as he heard about my son, was like, I must meet this boy. I can speak to him. We took him over there. He called another friend of his, a very successful guy over there, spent the whole day with my son. And they said to him, you know, whatever you want to do, we will back you with money, with our time, with our advice, with our expertise. And we all really hoped that it would make a difference. The guy also paid for, I think it was like 3 or 4 months of psychotherapy. And at the end of that time, I carried on paying for the psychotherapy. After my son moved with, and it didn't work. It didn't work, even having this promise, it didn't work. After my son moved in with my sister and her husband and her 2 children, another wonderful man who I don't even know, another very successful Black man stepped in, gave my son a job, was really giving him a lot of time and a lot of effort to really help to try and mentor him. And for about a month and a half, it really seemed like maybe it was working. And then my son ran away. And during all of this time, as well as reading the book about the cults, and I found another book about how to get somebody out of a cult, and I knew that's where my son's head was. I then had to learn how to speak to him, because it's very hard speaking to somebody you know is doing wrong and acting like they are being normal. So I then learned non-violent communication. And you can look that up. Absolutely brilliant, really helps you to hear the need behind what somebody is saying. This was really good, really helped us with our communication. All the while, I'm also empathizing with what he's doing and really sort of thinking about, okay, how do I use all of this to reach him? I did try and get some people to try and kidnap him and take him on a plane to Ghana, but I couldn't get the police to agree. So we went through quite a few different ways of trying to get him out of this. But one day when I was talking with my son, he commented on how much I had changed since I'd actually started working with psychedelics. And I'd been kind of tinkering with how to introduce them to my son, because I realized we were in this bizarre situation where I am saying to him, you cannot possibly want to be a drug dealer, that it's wrong to be out there at your age or any age selling crack and heroin to people. And then at the same time, because of the crazy world that we live in terms of the law, I'm also researching, looking at, reading all about psychedelics that are also called drugs and all classed in the same crazy pool. And so one day my son and I are talking, and I'd gone on this. Now I was really doing everything in the book, and I'm going to find the book on here. I've got it in my Audible. I was doing everything in the book, which was to talk to him like everything he was doing was completely and utterly normal. So I literally would phone him and I'd say to him things like, how was your day? How did you do? How's it going? And I mean, some of the times I could hear the kinds of people that he was away with. One time while I was talking to him, somebody started shouting in his face. So they were literally shouting down the phone. And this was a grown up adult. And I think that was one of my lowest days, when I really I just thought, I really cannot cope to hear a grown man screaming into my son's face, and I'm on the phone and I'm hearing this. And afterwards, um, because the guy was like, basically, what are you still doing here? You should be out there, and blah blah blah, money, blah blah blah, but screaming into my son's face. And after the guy went away, then my son, in a really normal voice, is going, right, so I've got to go now. And then I just had to really take a deep breath and go, okay, well, give me a call when you finish. And just my hands were shaking, everything. I was just so scared for him, but so angry, so angry. And during that time, that's when I really started to also get into my African spirituality. That happened one day when I actually broke down on Kilburn High Road. I was just on the phone to a friend, and I just found myself crying in the street, and just saying to her, I don't know what to do. What can I do? What else can I do? And she was like, but sis, you're always talking about your family before Christianity. Like, have you got an altar? Have you got an ancestral altar? And I was like, no. And she was like, get on the phone to Dalian, sort it out. And Dalian has an organization called Ancestral Voices, loads of education about African spirituality. And I got in touch with him. He told me how to start an ancestral altar. That day I went and bought my candles. I found an old wooden clock face that I had made in Ghana years ago, turned it upside down because it made a nice round surface. And I started my ancestral altar. Seren's father died when he was 8. So we have some of his ashes in a box, had that on there, got my water. And it did really start to make me feel better. And it reminded me that I'd met somebody who was a hoodoo priest some years before in America, an amazing guy, Siete. And so he's like a Nifa priest. He does voodoo, hoodoo. He's initiated into different African spiritual systems. So I got in touch with him, and he was brilliant. He told me what to get to start doing a series of spiritual baths, and also to pour libation at a crossroads, and to ask for help for Elegba. Elegba is a Nigerian, well, not just Nigerian now, because of the trade in Africans back in the day. Elegba is also a deity who is still revered in Brazil, Cuba, and other places. So I started pouring libation on Abbey Road, where we live, at the crossroads, and just really, really praying to the ancestors and to Elegba to just open the door to bring back my son. And my prayer was it was kind of like, bring back my son, but please don't let him go to prison, and please don't let him die, and please don't let him kill anyone. I sort of had all these conditions, and then I was still, but open the doors, open the doors, open the doors. And it was like, as my faith, I suppose, really in the ancestors was growing, my son's resolve to stay in it seemed to also be growing. So, and he knew, I always told him what I was doing. And we went through this period of time where he would disappear every weekend or in the week. And 5 weeks in a row, the police picked him up. But every time they picked him up, there was nothing on him. And I really felt like, oh, ancestors are listening to me. And I'd managed to get this special thing on his file to say that he was a vulnerable child, and he comes from a home where people are looking after him. So when you pick him up outside of London, please bring him to his door and give him to his mother. And sad to say that even though my son was picked up 5 times in a row, one time in a car full of adults, the youngest person in there was some like 34 years old. The car was full, over full, and he was the youngest person in the car at 14 and a half. They still never ever brought my son to my door. They actually would leave him to get out of the car at the estate of his handler, even though that information was also on his file. And when the police would pick him up, they would contact his social worker, not me. Thank goodness he had a brilliant social worker, because then she would contact me. And the thing was, this is even though I'd managed to get us into, they have all these schemes, and I'd managed to get us into every scheme, and we had 2 special police people I could bring, and all of this stuff. It's still, when it came down to everything, it didn't really make any difference being in this special police scheme with these 2 special police people I could phone, being in another special scheme where he had another special dedicated youth worker. And it's really because none of these people really understand what's going on in the brain of these kids. So after my son and I had the conversation where he mentioned that he could see how much I had changed since I'd started working with psychedelics, it gave me an idea. And it was an idea that had been brewing, but I just didn't know how I could approach it. And I started sending him lots of research stuff that I could find, all these articles, all these papers about psilocybin and MDMA research for PTSD, for trauma. And we talk about these, these articles and the research that was going on. And he was kind of interested to just turn in the computer a bit because of the beautiful rays of the sun that's coming in. And he was interested, but when I started sending it to him, I wasn't saying anything about him taking anything. I was just, kind of like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And isn't it interesting? And yeah, maybe I might work in this field at one stage. This was the conversation. And after he started really understanding, I found a brilliant interview with an underground psychedelic psychotherapist, and it was this guy with James Jesso, who has a podcast called Adventures Through the Mind. And I listened to this brilliant episode with this guy really talking about how he used to, and still does, I presume, help couples and other people, how he used to use MDMA and how he was using psilocybin, and also how, depending on what the issue was, he would sometimes use LSD. And as he went through his protocols, I thought, I think I can make this work on my son. So having had the thought was, okay, so how how do I broach this? And really, I can only really say, just through continual prayer to the ancestors, still pouring my libation, I just had the idea of just to say it outright. So at this stage, my son had now decided that he was going to be a bona fide drug dealer. That was going to be his life, and he was going to be really successful at it. And he was going to, when he returned very soon, he was going to move out and to do this. And so when he said that, because I was doing the cult book thing, which is not to argue against what your family member wants to do within a cult, so I'm kind of going, oh right, okay, yeah, that's interesting, yeah, I can see why you might want to do that. Having these crazy conversations, then I said to him, I will make a deal with you if you will come and take psychedelics under my instructions and me sitting for you. If you do everything I ask you to do for 2 nights, at the end of it, I think you will decide to leave what you're doing, or you will be the best drug dealer there's ever been, because you will have a better brain for it. And this conversation went on for a little while, and we would talk about it in different ways. And I, when I was talking to him, I was careful only really to talk about psilocybin, and he was reading a lot about it and all of this stuff. And one day he just turned around and said, okay, I'm coming back to London and I'll do it. So I had to get my skates on, get everything organized and sorted. And I decided to, I came up with my own protocol, which was MDMA first, night one, and then psilocybin night two. And it was absolutely amazing. We did the MDMA, and he was able to, the effects of it was even better than the textbooks say, to see it. He was able to see himself as he was there and then in that situation, and everything he believed about what he was doing. He was able to see, if you like, the groomed, abused child who had been made to think that this was a proper way to live. He was able to see everything from my point of view, from all our family members' point of views. I mean, at one stage, he was like, I've got to apologize to everybody. And he phoned everyone and apologized. My sister, my brother-in-law, my brother, both my brothers, my mum, his grandmother. He phoned everybody and apologized, and just had so much insight into everything that he'd done, everything that we'd done. And also, I mean, part of it was also a very difficult conversation in terms of things that he could see that I had done in his growing up years that also made him more susceptible for that story. And I'll go more into that. And it was just an amazing night. And near the end, he admitted that he did still have something on him in the house, but he was going to return it to the people, and he was never going to sell drugs again. So kind of that night when he finally went to bed, I think I was dancing around or something, but it was very emotionally draining, because the conversations had been just so deep and so full on, so full on. So the next day, he returned the people back there, in my language, in my African language, we call it bad medicine. So we returned the bad medicine back to the people. They slapped him around a bit, but they knew that I was in the vicinity, so nothing too bad happened to him. He just had some bruises. And then that night was when we worked with the psilocybin, and I'd say he cried for about 4.5 hours. And still to this day, he hasn't told me everything he saw during that time, but that was it. That was the end. He'd washed his hands of the whole thing, but it wasn't safe for him to really be here in this area. But what was so amazing about just having this massive change, 48 hours done, was then the unpacking of everything he'd been through, and just the constant talking about, and this is really the integration. The integration part of his experience was also really kind of family therapy between the two of us. One of the biggest things that he said, for him, which he said left a massive hole in him, was losing his father at 8, and then us leaving the country 3 months later to move to Ghana. And I think I'd done enough work on myself to understand that in those moments where as a parent you get to speak to your child and it's about you understanding their pain, really not being defensive and wanting to justify, you know, why you did things. And that one was a really difficult one for me, because for me it was we were moving to Ghana anyway, and his father and I had this huge, amazing kind of things sorted out in our heads of how life was going to be. He was going to go to a brilliant school in Ghana. At 13, he was going to move to Hong Kong or Singapore and live with his father over there and go to another fabulous school before going off to a fabulous university somewhere or other. We had this whole story, and then his father died 3 days before we left. Cool, that's the story as I have it. But his story is of being an 8-year-old who loses his father, and then 3 months later is in a whole other country, in a whole other culture. As much as he'd been to Ghana lots of times on holiday and he spoke the language, it was still a whole other place for him. And I had to really, really acknowledge that, yeah, that had left a massive hole in him. And the change again, 5 years later, you know, oh, your grandmother's sick, whoa, back into this place when he'd made a life for himself in Ghana. And in Ghana, it's the kind of place, if you're the cleverest kid in the class, you're the most popular kid in the class. He comes to the UK, behaves, you know, and he's already learned to go to a place, behave how they want you to behave. So we come back, and no, behaving like he was in Ghana did not bring him accolades. It brought him bullies and it brought him a lot of unwanted attention. So he went with who was the most powerful. And the most powerful people were the bullies when we came back to the UK. And it was really hard to hear. It was really hard to hear, but it was good for me to hear and to really validate his experience and to try and see things from his point of view, because um, I I had to understand that this wasn't just some random thing that just happened to him out of nowhere. I had to understand that actually there's many parts and we all played our part, and me and as his mother, unwittingly or whatever, played my part for him to end up where he was. And another thing that really came through when we talked was, he said before we'd left for the UK, when he was quite small, he could see how I was frightened of, you know, the bad black boys on the estate. And he said he could see how all the adults were frightened of these people. And for him, what that taught him was they're the strong people. So as much as, you know, myself and the family were giving him all of these black history books and, you know, be proud of who you are and da 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 da, all of that stuff, what he could also see was actually there's two stories of blackness that goes on in the society. Seren was the one who also made me see and start to understand about the internalized racism that we all have as a population, and it how it arises out of you at different times. In these talks that we had, and really at that time I didn't know about integration, but what I got to understand was what we were doing. We're having really long, intense integration sessions that would come out from working with the psilocybin and working with the MDMA and what was coming up. We were talking about our lives as individuals, our lives as mother and son, our lives in this country, our lives as Black people in this country, as Black people in the world, as him as a mixed race boy back in Africa. Big things and little things all had to be talked about and integrated and understood, and it was really, really, really powerful. It was really, really powerful period of time. I grew so much, really, I would say, in the year to 18 months after, in terms of just this constant integration and understanding and seeing how the wider society works, really getting to see why it was, in a way, the police could only ever do so much, and social services and all of this stuff. In a way where now, for a little while, it really angered me and I had all this stuff and changes I felt like I wanted to make. And now I'm kind of, I've integrated a lot of the experience and I'm kind of back to the South, and just how much I think all of this has taught me about everything I see on the outside that I think is wrong. I must first address on the inside, on me, in me first. And then actually, as I change, the outside changes. And not so much sometimes that the outside changes, but as I change, I'm able to deal with the outside in a way that comes from power rather than comes from pain and hurt. So that's really kind of, I would say, my story with psychedelics and how it's helped myself and my family. And now I tell this story, I suppose, because I really, really want to encourage people to take radical responsibility for their own wellness, for their family's wellness, and to do what you have to do for yourself and your family. And that's, yeah, that's what I'm about now. And that's what I'm hoping Inscape, the psychotherapy, psychedelic retreat organization that I'm affiliated with. Yeah, that's what myself and that organization and everybody else I'm with are about now. So that's me, Grace.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about your work with Inscape.
Yes. So Inscape was started by Dylan in Brighton. So Dylan Burns, and he's the head of the Psychedelic Society of Brighton. And he's a psychotherapist, and there's a group of psychotherapists and healers and people involved in breath work. And it's really just at this moment in time, it's very, very new, and we're just still kind of talking, sharing articles and training and looking at a future where we will have legalized use of psychedelics to add to psychotherapy and healing in the UK. Before COVID, we were going to be going to Holland, but with COVID and the difficulties in travel, we're kind of letting that sit on the ice for a bit. But yeah, it's very exciting because actually we're interested in all the different ways in which we can bring therapy and psychedelics together, because I think in some ways the normal structures that we have at the moment are a bit behind some of the ways in which I think we can help ourselves in using these medicines, and how to bring all the different things together, you know, breath work and psychedelics and spiritual healing and shamanic practitioners bring everything together, as well as looking at the work of people like Gabor Mate and other people who write about trauma and things. Just how we bring everything together so that you use what's appropriate for a particular person and what they're going through.
Could you speak a little bit about how you address the issue of safety, both in your practice yourself and then later on with your son as well?
So before everything, when I started using Cambo, I'm a real. I think Cambo is brilliant. I think Cambo is a brilliant place to start, because I think it gets rid of so much toxins that you've got in your major organs anyway, as well as toxins in your brain. I'm sure, I don't know this for a fact, it's a long time since I looked into Cambo, but I'm sure Cambo also helps to get rid of a lot of inflammation. And so I think starting really sort of like gently, rather than going, thinking that the most important thing is your ayahuasca or your psilocybin or your MDMA. I think it's good to start with something like Cambo, so you can really clean up your system. And then in terms of, let's say, like quantities and stuff, I mean, I think the thing is, if you're taking radical self-responsibility, then part of that is really, really, really adequate research, and that's up to you how much research you do. But I was definitely reading and watching things for a good year and a half, almost 2 years, before it was even possible for Iboga to come my way. And before I got to have Iboga, I'd actually had 9 bouts of Cambo, and I microdosed Iboga for over 3 months before I even had my flood dose. I think if somebody's working with these medicines and somebody comes to them, I would hope that they know enough to be able to tell the difference between someone who's just hoping, give it to me and it will fix me. I really, really hope so. But if they don't know, then that person, you need to be able to kind of ask yourself some questions. Are you just hoping to just take something? And as somebody said to me one time, I thought I was going to see ancestors and unicorns. If you're going into medicines wanting ancestors and unicorns, you need someone to help you with intention setting and already looking and talking about integration before you even go in. So that, I think, if you can work around intention setting and integration before you even go in, that should help you have a good idea about what you're doing, and also start to bring in things about safety. If you read enough about Iboga and you go to a festival and you hear that there's somebody doing Iboga ceremonies in a field on the left, hopefully you know enough to know that no, you shouldn't be doing that. But people will do what they want to do ultimately, and I think our society also needs to be robust enough to also allow that to happen, because we allow that to happen with prescription meds. Loads of people abusing prescription meds, but nobody ever says we've got to ban codeine or any of those kind of medicines, even though they're making loads of people dependent on them.
I think something that's come through is this radical self-responsibility and the time that it has taken you working with these medicines, and this idea that Yes, there's lots of research going on into psychedelics as medicines at the moment, and the great therapeutic potential of these. But this concept that really there is no magic bullet, no magic pill, and this is lifelong, ongoing work. And I suppose when you began your kind of work with psychedelics and your spiritual practices, how did you come to that realization? Is that something that at the outset you kind of thought that you would kind of use a medicine like this once and then would heal some kind of imbalance within you? How did that play out for you?
Yeah, I didn't really know, because in the beginning it was, I remember when I was really searching, because I didn't know, you know, in the 90s when I was really young, there was like, you know, ease good, there was the song, and and you went out partying and you would have an ecstasy tab, and that was it. Once I kind of matured and I was ready to have a child, I kind of didn't even know anybody anymore who was involved with anything like that. So when I realized that I was depressed, I didn't actually even really, I didn't know about psychedelics in that way. It was like I knew LSD, I knew MDMA, but they were just something people took to party. I didn't even know that there was a therapeutic aspect. It was really when I was trying to, how I came to it all was I was just trying to get well fast. I knew I didn't have the time to be 3 years in therapy. Like, I knew I had to become really strong really quickly to deal with what was going on. And so it was, I would search things like how to get over procrastination fast, how to get rid of depression fast. You know, that those were the kind of searches that I was doing. So, and I remember when I first heard about ayahuasca, and I was telling my siblings, and my sister was, one day my sister and I went out and she was like, okay, tell me. I don't know what you're talking about half of the time when you keep talking about this thing called ayahuasca. What is it that's wrong with you? And I said to her, I feel like a computer that needs to be defragged. I feel like I need reformatting. I feel like every single program that I've got going on in my head is old and there's bits missing, and it's just not working at the rate it needs to work at to deal with where I find my life. And explaining it like that to her really helped me realize where I was. And once I started thinking about it in that way, then when I started reading about psychedelics, I could see, I do need some new neuro pathways. Like, I really, this stuff that they're saying what they can do is what I need. And so then I found out that, okay, yes, each time I could see things becoming clear. I could see more ideas coming, because I was obsessed with what else can I do to get my son out of this situation. Once I was no longer really unhappy, which really started to go very quickly, even with the Cambo, it started to go. It was just right. Okay, how do I get more information out of my head so that I can deal with this situation? And each time, I would say the medicine never failed me. It always helped me to access other bits of knowledge. And that then, it's like the spirituality and the psychedelics kind of fused, because I could see how the world wasn't just what we see. You know, it was, and yeah, the coincidences and the serendipity and the synchronicities. It's like, yeah, the spirituality and the psychedelics kind of came together and just made things start to fall into place. I don't know if I've answered your question. Have I answered your question?
Yes, in a way. And I think what you said about the kind of use of spiritual practice as well is something that's very interesting, and how you use the practice and the conversations with your son as a type of integration. And of course, with the research, how psychotherapy plays a massive part in using these medicines clinically, but the space for not necessarily a psychotherapist, but another kind of spiritual leader or somebody who fits in with the person, dependent on who they are, and how that helps. One thing that you did speak about a little bit, which I'm not sure that everybody understands, about libation. I was wondering if you could just explain briefly about that.
Okay, so libation is when you pour water or alcohol to your ancestors or to the spirits. So Alegba is known as the road opener. So he's kind of similar to Ganesh, in that you go to him if you have an intractable problem and you just, all you want is a road to be open so that you don't have that problem anymore. And some people call him Papa Alegba. You pour libation at the crossroads. And so we have on our road, just very close to me, there's a brilliant crossroads. So yeah, that's where I would go with a little miniature bottle. So I have one of the miniature bottles. I now have that on my ancestral altar here, and I would just go when it was quite late in the middle of the night, and I'd have to, cross diagonally so that when I got to the middle, I could just be pouring the alcohol and just be doing a little prayer, just saying, Baba Legba, please open the door, bring me back my son, but please don't let him go to prison, don't let him be killed, don't let him kill anyone, just bring me back my son. And that was my constant prayer at that time. And I pour libation still quite often, pour libation of water. So I've got a special tree in the garden just over there. So in the morning, every day I put new water on my ancestral altar, and every day when I come up, that water waters some plants, and what's left I pour as libation into the garden at my special tree before new water is brought up. So I've really deepened my ancestral practice now, really deepened it a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Something I didn't say at the beginning, which is always important for me to say, is of course that Psychedelic Studies Imperial does not endorse the use of any of these medicines, but it is purely about shedding light on this work in this field, and it's been great to have you exploring a different perspective, which we haven't platformed in the society before, and how important it is actually for there to be space for your voice and voices like yours to be heard, because it's important that as we pave a road of using these medicines clinically, that there is a space for this to be understood by clinicians, by the public, and by other people as well, so we can really kind of destigmatize the use of these substances. I thought it was also interesting, you mentioned about putting or looking at psychedelics in the same category as other drugs, such as crack, and how you kind of went around reframing that how did you kind of reconcile that, and kind of when you are speaking with other people, is that something that you often come up against? And yeah, what are your feelings and views on that?
Yeah, I do come against it. I'm just going to answer. Nemo just asked about my son. He's doing really, really, really well now, and he's no longer in the country. And he is. I was saying to my sister just the other day that it feels like it's like he got off at the wrong stop and went on this mad detour, and he's just got back on the bus or the train again. He's he's really, really turning into the young man we always knew that he could be. But it's been a really long road, because even after he made the decision not to go back into that, he then really has been going through a very, very long, hard time that people do go through when they come out of cults, which is you don't trust yourself, so you don't trust your mind, because you realize what you were doing and how so many things you were going around saying was your decision weren't really your decision. So he's been going through all of that, but he's been still working with the medicines. But it's still been a really long road. I would say it's been a road that's more than a year. And it's only really last month that I can say that we're having the kinds of conversations where I'm like, wow, he's back with a vengeance. So it's a long, long, long road, but yeah, you know, well worth going through. But so yeah, that was an aside just to answer that. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, before when I would talk about it, it would bother me more that people didn't understand the differences. Now it doesn't bother me so much that people don't understand the differences, and I really just answer them really, really, really quickly. You know, I just tell people that actually crack, cocaine, heroin are not medicines, um, and they help people check out. And actually, LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, iboga are medicines, and can help people. And like any medicine, you've got to know how to take it. You know, you can cure yourself with aspirins. So, you know, it's all about knowing how to take it. And I kind of leave it just like that, because I don't really want to spend loads of times getting um, into, but they're all drugs, with somebody who doesn't know the difference. So I really just say to people, you know, why don't you read some more about it? This is what they are. And I just kind of leave it there for them to do the work. I won't spend a long time on that one with people, because it's just a waste of energy, really.
And I had another question, which has now escaped my you no, it's gone again. It will come to me. But please, everybody viewing, do feel free to add any more questions into the chat.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to ask you to just tell us a little bit more about the group that you're doing, that you're part of.
So Psychedelic Studies Imperial is a student-led society at Imperial College London, and it was established in line with the work that was going on with the psychedelic research group at Imperial, now headed by Robin Carhart Harris. And yeah, it's really to kind of shed light on the research in the area. There was a lot of difficulty in setting up the society to begin with, and kind of getting people to appreciate this as a kind of valid area of kind of discourse, and appreciate that this is an endorsement of taking these substances, but really that it's happening, and it's worthwhile listening to and exploring. We are hoping to host our first conference next year. So perhaps you might like to join us for that.
For sure.
And the question has returned to my mind. So, of course, your story and your experiences yourself with psychedelics are something that I suppose some people, there can be quite a lot of backlash against, and something perhaps even more controversial is using these types of medicines with young people. And so for you, as a mother using these medicines, how has it been for you to kind of share your story publicly, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I suppose the easy part of it is the fact that my son's out of it. So that's like the easy part of it, because if we'd used this and then, you know, and then he went off, and if we used this and then he actually said, oh, brilliant, I know exactly how I'm going to make loads of money dealing drugs, then I suppose I would have been like, oh shit, you know, I've promised to never say anything against it again. But I knew in my heart of hearts, and I knew from what I could see, that he was traumatized. He was suffering from PTSD. He was not himself. I mean, my brother-in-law, when he took my son to live with him, talks about he was walking with my son with another guy, and this car backfired, and my son just jumped kind of into a hedge. And he goes, they just both looked at him like, what are you doing, sir? And he goes, that's when he realized how bad a state my son was in, because he realized that no, this boy is not just a bad boy. He realized like the psychological impact of what my son was going through. So because I also knew how sick he was getting, it wasn't hard for me to make those choices. And when I discuss it with people, I'm also able to point to the fact that, and it's really sad that one of my son's best friends, they both groomed at the same time, is now in a psychiatric hospital. And he was also going down as my son was going down psychologically. I think he was going further faster because he was already on the autism spectrum a little bit, and I think he was traumatized in some very public bad ways. My son could have been as well, and has hidden those stories, but anybody who has had or been close to children who've gone through this, they know that these children are not well very quickly once they get into this. For people who don't know, because they just hear stuff on TV and they're just kind of like, oh, well, you know, if only there was a role model around, you know, and they have those kind of things. They used to annoy me before, but now I don't even let them annoy me, because I even understand why they need to believe that. Because if this can happen to children from normal families, then this is really scary. So they need you to be from a bad home. They need to believe that if only there was a good role model around, this wouldn't happen to children. They need to believe that your child is safe at school and isn't going to be groomed into selling drugs in school. They need to believe that schools will not allow this to go on. They need to believe that schools do not actively not tell parents what they know. Like, they need to believe all of those things, because if the other side is true, then that makes it really scary. One of the conversations I had with my son, when we were talking about his school, and he asked me about my experience of going to school in this country, and we were talking about racism and teachers and stuff, and then he said to me, "But you put me there. You put me in such a place to be taught by such people." And it was really hard to hear, but it was true. I did put him there. Black parents do that all the time. We all put our children into places that we know are not the best places for our children. You know, and he really pulled me up on a lot of stuff. And it was all kind of like, yeah, fuck, I fucked up there. I'm really, really sorry. Really, really, really sorry, because I never knew, I never was honest enough to acknowledge that there's things that we do as parents, and we do it knowing that they're not the best things to do for our children, but we do it because everybody else is doing it. You know, and so we've had some really, really, really difficult conversations, and when I bring them up with other parents, they're really, really hard and challenging. They're really, really hard and challenging, because yeah, we do this to our children, knowing what we've been through, knowing what it was like to have the kinds of teachers that we had back in the 70s and 80s. But then we put our children back in those places now, and then we hope that the teachers are better, that the schools are different, but we know what kind of world we live in, but we still do it to our children. And all of these things make it easier for our children to fall prey to being groomed, and all of this kind of stuff. So it's a complicated, well, no, it's not complicated, it's just difficult, because it calls for a lot of honesty. And so I don't mind talking to parents and sharing my story, because I won't lie about the things that we lie to ourselves about, as Black parents, as poor parents, as women. You know, I think all the different kind of subjugated groups, we all have ways in which we lie to ourselves, because actually you don't want to have to deal with all aspects of all of it all the time. So you kind of pretend, oh, I don't quite see that, you know, go to school, it's all right. You know, we all do that kind of nonsense. And so yeah, this experience has been really good, because his experience it's pulled me up. It's pulled me up, and I've had to be honest and admit my failings, and the ways in which I was dishonest, and all of that stuff. And that's life. And now, you know, he's older and he's going to have children or not, but he too will have to negotiate life and find, you know, where it is that he's been honest or not honest. And also he has to live with what he's been through. I don't know all the things that he's done. I'm sure, you know, he's got things that he has to find a way to live with. And this last kind of year and a half of his constant integration, only he knows the full extent of what kind of peace he's had to make with himself, really.
In in terms of the integration, you spoke about family therapy, and how did you kind of integrate your work, and how has your son integrated the work that he's done with the wider community? And what was the role of that?
Yeah, so he doesn't really speak about his experience. I think he has a little bit with different family members, and little bits with me, but not hugely. I mean, he's still quite young. He's 19 now. Um, and I feel like he will as he gets a bit older, because he does talk about kind of wanting to be an example for his cousins and nephews and things. So I feel like as he's coming through the other side even more. But what we do a lot is, and I think about it as integration, is we talk a lot about, I suppose, our inner lives, and we talk a lot about our realizations. Personally, when I work with medicine by myself, I will usually write down the my whole trip, and then I will also look at, okay, what are the themes, what's coming out, what question did I take to the medicine. Some questions you take, I mean, what I always say to people with integration is, I think it's always good to remember the question that you took to the medicine. Very often the trip that you have is, it shows you the door to the question. It shows you kind of like what, you know, you go in asking one question: I want to be able to do more of whatever, I want to get rid of whatever. And then the medicine takes you to the door of why it is you can't do whatever it is you want to do, or why it is you haven't got whatever it is you want to get. And it shows you what you now need to work on. I think sometimes when people don't do integration, and integration is unpacking the story that you were given in your visions, and then doing the work that you were shown to do. Um, and sometimes people miss out that bit. So they'll have the trip, and you get that nice window where you've not got lots of thoughts and all of this kind of stuff. And you can feel like that's it. No, that's the window of time to make changes to do with the question that you had going in. So when I help people with integration, really, I will keep harping back to the question they went in with, and then tying it to what it is that they saw, and seeing what work has been given to them. So with myself as an example, and I haven't tripped for ages. I don't trip very often because I try to do all the bits of work that I need to do. And so until I feel like I've exhausted that trip, I will not be going back into any kind of medicine. Um, so my last trip, I had a lot of archetypes. I had the goddess Kali, I had the goddess Kuan Yin, and I had some amazing Jamaican woman who was booming, making all these spells. And the tree of life was within me, and they were washing out all the channels of the tree of life with this huge hose of seawater. I remember it was seawater. So after that, I started really just researching the three deities that I saw, trying to make connections between them, what they represented, and the question I went in with. And I went in with a question about time, and it was interesting that one of the main focuses was Kali, because Kali is also time, and the great mother and all this stuff. So just doing lots of research and meditating on Kali, and trying to express what Kali stands for in my life. And I have a, a really nice poster of Kali that I like on the wall. I've got one of Kuan Yin coming. I mean, this is something I've been working on now for maybe about 3-4 months, and it's still it's still not finished as I try to integrate more things, try to have more understanding of what I saw is trying to bring out of me. And it's been a lot of work because I asked about time. I went in asking about time, and then I've had so many experiences with time since then, and I still don't know what the end of it will be, but that's how I work with what happens in a trip. I will dissect it and work with every single element until I realize I understand everything. And there was so much in that one. I've been doing lots of research on the Kabbalah tree of life because that's what I saw. And so, and boy, it's probably going to be years with this one before I feel like I can go back in, because there's a lot that came out. So when I help people with integration, that's what I do really. I really, really break it down, and I keep tying things back to their question. And then the other thing that can happen with working with people with integration is this field can open up where you start to receive bits of information. And this can happen if you're a sitter for somebody, you can actually receive bits of information from the field about them, which is really extraordinary as well. But even just in integration, so you haven't even been there when they tripped, you're just helping them integrate the field. You find you're in a field with them, and bits of information about them can come in. That stuff I do not understand. I still do not understand this, but I am. When I told other members of Inscape, then I learned that this is something that happens actually in psychotherapy a lot, where the psychotherapist can start to receive pertinent bits of information either from or somehow, it comes through. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff. But I think integration is really important. And I always say, I don't think you should go in for another dose of medicine until you've wrung everything out of that last trip and you understand it inside and out, and you've instituted changes. And even if you haven't been able to institute changes, sometimes I think just knowing what you need to change can really, really be helpful, because sometimes then you can find somebody else to help you change that thing that the medicine has shown you. You can get a coach. I got a business coach really through work that I'd been doing with the medicine. I realized I needed help to help me with my business, so I got a business coach. So I think we should really use the medicines in that way, be really practical with it, not just sort of be sitting there, oh, I really want to change this, let me just take this. Oh, it didn't change. Oh, who's doing an ayahuasca circle over there? Who's doing peyote over there? Who's doing, toad over there? It's the medicines just show you to the door, but it's you that has to do the work to walk in through the door and clear out that trauma room that we all have so many of inside of us.
Have you had conversations with your doctor at all about the experiences that you've had? Because I remember you saying that you did go to see them when you were kind of feeling depressed, and there were antidepressants on the table, but you felt that this wasn't right for you. Was there any kind of follow-up perhaps with your doctor off of the back of that? Or how did that play out?
No, I don't go to the doctors. They tried to chuck me off the list recently, and I was kind of like, no, leave me on the list. I know I don't come, but leave me on the list. No, I mean, one of the side things in a way since all of this is I've got more and more into herbal medicines, into preventative kind of like natural medicines, Yeah, right. I don't know when I'll see, you know, I'd go to the hospital if I break my arm or something. But on the whole, as a reasonably healthy person who doesn't have any kind of like underlying health issues, I just try my best to constantly listen to my body and what it is that I need. So I haven't been back to the doctors since that time. I've not had any reason to go back to the doctors. No, I mean, I did tell the social worker after, yeah, my son had the medicine at his last, because they have these case reviews where you've got the police and social workers and everything. And by that stage, he was so deep in. I mean, this is the funny thing, actually. He was so deep in that every time we'd have these case studies, there'd be less and less experts there. Because it was, oh well, we put him on this scheme, it didn't work, we put him on that scheme, it didn't work, we got him this person, it didn't work. So by the end, I think the last meeting we went to, there was maybe 4 people, 5 people, and so there was one more booked. And I was really excited to go to that one. And we went to that, and I told them like he's not doing it anymore. And I went to that one, and they were kind of like, so, you know, what happened? You saying he's not doing it anymore? He's out of it. And I was like, yeah, MDMA and psilocybin did it. And it was all kind of like, well, I mean, that's really illegal. And it's like, yeah, but isn't it amazing how he's not selling drugs anymore?
Mm.
You know, but
Mm.
you know, and in the end, I mean, it got a bit heated, and I was like, well, call the police, you know, call them right now and have me arrested. And let's take this somewhere, because actually lots of parents really do need to know that there is something else you can do, and it's not the only things on the cards that you're waiting for is prison or being stabbed or just hoping that your child is going to change their mind. And
Mm.
they didn't call the police.
Mm.
And
But a very
yeah,
brave stance to take from yourself. So
all
well done for
stupid.
doing that. But no, nonetheless, I'm glad that it worked out well, and that.
Yeah.
But I was interested to hear whether there was any kind of follow up from the social worker on that protocol, and yeah,
No, just
what
that
that
one,
was.
just that
But
one meeting, and that was it. Case closed. Yeah,
mm,
after that.
Because there is this grey area, of course, that what you did was illegal, but weighing up the damage that was occurring for something which was also illegal, and weighing up the two. Very interesting. Did it? Did the kind of social workers and other people at the meeting, you say that it did get heated, did it seem perhaps that their eyes had been opened to some kind of alternative, or that a seed had been planted with them, or were they very kind of what was their response to it, I mean, outside of that?
It was interesting. I think some of them, there was 2 younger ones, and they were definitely really intrigued, and they said that they were going to contact me afterwards. And then one of them did contact me, and it was really more about kind of trying to help other parents in the area. But I was told, like, you know, but don't say anything about psychedelics, but maybe to tell people about kind of like the videos that you watched and the books that you read and things like that. Which I said, yeah, I'm happy to do, but they never did organize anything. But then also COVID sort of came along not too long afterwards, so it was kind of fair enough, really, that you know, nothing kind of came of it. But I think for me also, straight afterwards, I was so relieved, um, and it finally gave me headspace to, right, okay, in a way, this has been my life for the last 4 years. It's been really hard to really concentrate on business and all of this kind of stuff, that I also didn't want to stay in that space, in that world of county lines, drug dealing, and all of this stuff. I was ready to kind of like, get on with my business and all of this kind of stuff. And it's only really kind of now that I've started to think, okay, maybe there is a happy medium of being able to share the story, so other parents and other family members realize that there are other ways of looking at things, even if it's not this kind of story. There's just other ways of looking at things, because if you can change your mind, then everything is open to you. If you can't change your mind, you're kind of buggered, really. But if you can change your mind, you can have a different thought, you can have a different perspective, you can have choices again. And I think more than anything, that's what psychedelics can help you have, our choices again.
Mm. Something as well which you brought up in terms of the role of the doctor in your life, and kind of alternative medicines that you seek that aren't the kind of mainstream Western system, and how these can all play a role for you. What are your views on kind of the best way that you feel that psychedelics could be integrated into society? It seems that it's kind of very much a clinical role at the moment, in the UK, and how do you think that? Do you think that that's a good thing, that it should be solely clinical, or what kind of model do you foresee?
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is, psychedelics are good for all sorts of things, not even, just kind of like depression and PTSD and trauma. I mean, one of the things that really, all I can say is that the mushrooms imparted to me was that we have a family member who has lung problems. So and where she was living, life was quite difficult. And so at the start of COVID, we were quite worried about her, because she'd had pneumonia twice before. So, and she was quite isolated and all of this kind of stuff. And it was just something that we all knew. And one day I was just kind of walking up the stairs, and it was clear as day, like this voice, and it was, she should microdose at night, it will clear up her lungs. And I was really in two minds about what to do about this, because it was, she's somebody who's of a certain age, of a certain culture, lives in a certain type of country where, just even getting your hands on it was going to be a mission. So I told a couple of people, and they were like, well, just try it and see. So, I phoned her, I told her, and there was somebody who was traveling around that country at the time. So kind of, it took ages to make it all happen, but it was amazing. So she microdosed at night just before she went to bed. And she phoned me the next day, and she was like, oh my God, my lungs are clear. And I was like, really? And she was like, well, you must have known, you told me. And I was like, well, I know, but I didn't think it could happen, straight away. And it has. And she was telling me she's able to walk really long distances, but like the first 3 times, and that was the interesting thing. So I told her the Fadiman kind of technique once every 4 days, really, really, really small piece, but it not in the day, just before, literally as her head's on the pillow. And she said the first 3 times, just all this phlegm that came out the next day. But since then, there's not been that. But her breathing, because before when you would talk to her on the phone, you could hear kind of like a lot of inflammation in her throat, on her chest. She found it difficult. She walked fast to get the phone. All of this, it's all gone. It's all cleared out. So that's been like really interesting. It's like, oh, and then she was like, and do you know what? I actually feel so much better about so many things. So that's been really interesting that actually it's cleared that inflammation, and it's also helping to clear the way that she thinks. So and then she then said that she knew somebody, an older woman, who'd had this cough that just wouldn't go, and she'd had this cough for about 3 years, and it was getting to the stage where if she talked for quite a long time it would start it all back up. She felt it would work for this old woman. She gave her some. The old woman tried it. Her cough is going. So I think there's, more things probably, because so many illnesses are to do with inflammation. So many illnesses. So I think definitely with psilocybin anyway, could really, really be one of the most important medicines that we're going to need to start using as we go forward. There's so many more people with arthritis. So I've been thinking, well, if it's helped with pneumonia and it's helped with this bizarre incessant cough, then okay, probably it will help with arthritis and other illnesses that are made worse by inflammation. So I think the promise of psilocybin anyway are huge, and it's so the future is going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be really, really, really interesting. So I'm hoping that I'm going to start reading. I did look up inflammation and psilocybin, and from what I read, it hasn't been totally proven scientifically, but I can say in our family it's been proven. So, but it seems to be microdosing at night seems to be that the nighttime thing seems to be the main thing of it. So, with
yeah, very, very interesting. And I do hope that in the UK we will consider research with psilocybe mushrooms scientifically and studying the very effects that you say. I think you brought up something which is very important in this field, and also with medical cannabis as well, this kind of hierarchy of evidence that we have, and these kind of double-blind, randomized controlled trials being the gold standard. But the big role of anecdotal evidence as well, and there comes a point when you do need to pay attention to the anecdotal evidence, take it seriously, and if the devising the studies doesn't necessarily fit in the framework that we have at the moment, then considering changing the framework so that we can actually study these things, if there is the potential that they can help people, if other people have been helped. I'll just check to see if we have any more questions on the...
So Mattie's saying, so she was saying that she's not surprised, I suppose, by the medicine may be working at night when the body's in full rest. And then she's saying she wonders though wonder the impact or how to choose diseases with those with other illnesses such as heart, etc. And
Okay.
Okay. So apparently
So how
there's
to determine which illnesses actually to study, and I suppose basing that off of kind of existing anecdotal evidence and kind of building that evidence base qualitatively so that we can take it forward.
Yeah. Well, there's so many illnesses that are inflammation based. I mean, Dr. Sebi, who was really, really amazing electric vegan promoter. So he was promoting veganism, but of fruits and vegetables that were not hybrid. So they're only original fruits and vegetables. Um, and he used to always say that all diseases are inflammation, and that's what and he very often used to say about arthritis being something that starts with an inflamed area, and then or I think it's white cells or something come there, and then it gets all hard and calcified and all of this stuff. And I know with my shoulder, I'm touching it now because it's starting to hurt again. I had repetitive strain injury because I'm a seamstress. So I'm always cutting and right-handed, so I was lifting fabric mostly with this arm. And when I work a lot, then this shoulder starts to hurt. And when it first started happening, I went to the doctors and I was told, oh, you've got the start of arthritis. Then somebody told me about this guy who did cupping and Chinese medicine. When I went to see him, he was like, well, arthritis isn't a sickness. Arthritis is the result of an injury that wasn't attended to. And when you ended up with inflammation and swelling. So he did some cupping around my shoulder like 1 hour, and my arm was brilliant. I went from not being able to lift my arm to being able to go all like that. So every time I get very busy now, I realize, oh, it's coming, and I just go for cupping, and it pulls the muscle away from the bones and stuff so that there's space for the injured bit to start to get better, instead of before, I was just kind of told, well, yeah, you've got arthritis is starting. So, I think maybe there will start to be a period of time where actually, depending on what you go to the doctors with and how quickly they can catch it, psilocybin might actually be one of the starting medicines for all manner of things that are to do with inflammation. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the new times.
And even to have the option,
Yes,
if not first line, really, just greater patient choice.
yes,
For
yes.
sure.
Yeah.
If I don't think we have anything more come through on the chat. Is there anything that you would like to conclude with?
I think really about integration, I would say for people who've maybe had a trip that they couldn't quite understand, or they went in with a question that they're not sure if it got answered, you can have an integration session with a friend, even just telling them what the intention you was going in and what you saw, and just together try and decipher and work out what your next steps should be. I think that's my real thing really is integration. That's the most important thing. That's my parting thoughts.
Thank you so much. As you brought up the mushrooms at the end, it reminded me of a post that I saw recently, which I would like to share, perhaps to conclude. And it talks about, I'll just quote this. I'll quote the post. Maybe mushrooms are such good medicine because their essence is that they break down dead and decaying matter. They do this literally, and psilocybe mushrooms also do it physically, breaking down old conditioned patterns and trauma, which we are better off letting go. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And thank you everybody for watching. Hope that you've learned something today and opened your mind to some new perspectives, if nothing else.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Wonderful. Thank you very much.